Well, welcome to the second annual Malcolm X Justice and Peace Lecture Series at Minneapolis Community and Technical College. My name is Dr. Matthew Palumbo. I teach philosophy and religion studies here at MCTC for the last 11 years. The Malcolm X series was started 2 years ago by students and faculty at MCTC who believed that African American, and Muslim people who struggle for justice and peace are often known for their activism, but not as much for their intellectual contributions that help us all, as they say, read the signs of the times. We believe that the academy in the United States, whether in elementary, high school, or college, has not taken these intellectual contributions seriously. So the purpose of the Malcolm X Justice and Peace Lecture Series is to promote the intellectual traditions of African American, African, and Islamic authors and activists as they relate to contemporary issues of justice and peace. Malcolm X was not just a great activist, but a great intellectual as well. I would like to thank a few people now. Khadija Bawazir, one of the co-founders of the Malcolm X series, for all of her hard work and leadership. Dr. Nadia Mohammed for her work as well. Thanks to Noura Bawazir, who made the beautiful posters that you've seen around. Thanks to Dr. Ruthann Crapo and Dr. Charles Watson, and MCTC students Faduma Abdi, Madhu Jao, and Mayar Arafa for their contributions to this series as well. We believe that events like this show the best of MCTC, a place that educates not just for a sustainable career or an artistic creativity or social activism, but also a place for cultivating a socially engaged life of the mind. If you take a look at your purple agenda, you'll notice on here that we have plenty of time from now till 12:30 for you to ask questions to the speakers. When you ask questions, you can direct those to the three speakers as a whole, or you can direct a question to one of the speakers that you will hear from. So please, as the speakers are talking, please write down, think about, and think through good questions. This is mostly your time to engage our speakers. I'd like now to introduce our three speakers for this morning, and their bios are on the back side of the purple agenda that you have. First, Dr. Nadia Mohammed is a professor of global studies and Arab studies at MCTC. She is Egyptian by birth, Arab by ethnicity, American by residency, and Muslim by choice. She holds a bachelor's in business and in Islamic law, an MA in Sharia law, and a PhD in education. Professor Nadia has founded 2 Islamic schools, taught at the Islamic University of Minnesota, and served in leadership positions in a variety of educational contexts. She's the faculty advisor for the Muslim Student Association and published both in English and Arabic on various topics including Sharia law, dialogue, and secularism. She teaches courses here at MCTC, including world religions, Arab history and cultures, and strategies for college success. Also, Dr. Osama Abu Irshaid is the founder and editor of El Mizan newspaper, a national newspaper published in Arabic. He is also a highly sought-after political analyst and commentator and lectures frequently on Middle East and American politics. Currently, he is a non-resident scholar at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies in Doha, Qatar. Dr. Abu Irshaid has authored and co-authored several books, articles, and studies in English and in Arabic on issues relevant to Middle East and its political climate. He is the co-author of the study Hamas, Ideological Rigidity and Political Flexibility, which was published in the United States Institute of Peace in 2009. Dr. Osama is a regular commentator on Palestinian and Middle Eastern affairs, as well as on American domestic and foreign policy, on various Arabic satellite networks, including Al Jazeera, Syrian TV, Al-Alam, Abu Dhabi, and Al-Hiwar TV. Dr. Osama completed his PhD at Loughborough University, and he will be giving our keynote address entitled Beyond the Disaster, Understanding the Situation in Syria. Finally, our third speaker is Modou Diaw, a current MCTC student, was born and raised in Gambia, West Africa. Modou is 22 years old, came to the United States in 2009. He currently works full-time and is a full-time student, majoring in mathematics and the first in his family to attend college. Modou has been studying religion since he was 4 and finished the Quran in grade 6. Modou reads and writes in Arabic, English, and French. He will be transferring to the University of Minnesota for a bachelor's in electrical engineering and computer science with a minor in philosophy. Please welcome Dr. Osama.
Thank you, Dr. Matthew. Good morning. I want to start by thanking Dr. Nadia for getting me here. She's the one who's behind it. She's been insisting that I come and address you, and I make sure that you get bored and confused when it comes to the information about Syria. Also, Dr. Matthew, if it wasn't for your dedication, you're very persistent in following up. So thank you, and thank you all for coming. And I think it's, I want to use my stopwatch just to make sure that I don't go beyond my time. Well, this is the first visit in a while to Minnesota where I see a good weather. I've been here maybe 4 or 5 times in the past 6 months, and every time I came here, I was waiting to go back to the airport and fly back to Washington, D.C. So now I would say that you deserve it. It's a good weather. Spring already started. Now, before I start, I want to clarify that my talk is not meant to chronicle the Syrian political history nor the current revolution, as I'm more interested in focusing on the current situation in Syria today and what led to it, the factors that led to it. This will better help us understand the situation. But also I want to provide a quick or a brief background to the factors that led to the situation today and to put it in perspective, because the revolution in Syria today did not arise in a vacuum, nor was it a foreign conspiracy as the regime, the Syrian regime and its allies allege today. It is a revolution that has been in the making for the past 4 decades. And I will explain why I say for the past 4 decades. But if you're following up the news from Syria today, if you're following up the political discourse of the regime, of its allies like Hezbollah, Russia, Iran, you will hear them saying that this is a conspiracy to undermine, to weaken one of the main pillars, quote unquote, of the axis of resistance in the region. But let's take a look at the situation in Syria for the past 4 decades to know why we arrived at this point, why the revolution is taking place in Syria, why it was imminent that the revolution was to happen in Syria. And I want to use the year of 1963 as a reference point. I'm using 1963 as a reference point because this is the year, or that was the year, in which the Ba'ath Party, the current party that rules Syria today, came into power through a coup. Again, this was back in 1963. Hafiz al-Assad, who's the father of the current president, Bashar al-Assad, was one of the leaders of that coup. And for those who don't have a background about the Ba'ath Party is a pan-Arabist, secular, socialist party, supposedly. So they came into power in 1963, and right after that there was an internal conflict over power within the party, starting from 1967, intensified after the war of June 1967, the war with Israel, June 1967, where Hafez al-Assad was the defense minister, and as we all know, that Syria was defeated, the Golan Heights were taken, occupied by Israel. So there was an internal struggle of power, and they wanted to expel Hafez al-Assad. So he took over power again through a coup d'etat in 1970. So there was a second coup d'etat, but from within the Ba'ath Party itself. As he called it, the correction revolution. He corrected the path of the Ba'ath Party according to his claim. Since 1971 until today, Hafez al-Assad, or until June 2000 when he died, Hafez al-Assad never ran for elections. He was instated by referendums that gave him 100% or close to 100%, 5 referendums between 1971 till June 2000 when he passed away, 5 referendums that ensured that he is the president. No one ran against him, almost 100%, and he continued to rule in the name of the will of the people. Though they were never permitted to elect him, they were never given a choice to elect anyone but him. So this has been happening since 1963. Now this man, Hafez al-Assad, the father, did not rule by the will of the people. What he did instead, that he ruled Syria with an iron grip, with a brutal regime, with a security regime. And he did not rule not only with the will of the Syrians, and did not rule even in the name of the majority of Syrians, because Hafez al-Assad is an Alawite, and the Alawites is a minor sect of Shia Islam, and they are a minority within Syria, less than 10% of the total population, who never ruled Syria throughout history. So he was the first person from this Alawite sect to rule Syria in the name of a sect, in the name of a minority who discriminated once he got into power against the overwhelming majority of the Sunni Arabs and against other minorities like the Kurds, who were banned from obtaining citizenship in their own country. The Kurds who are in some parts of in eastern Syria today. So he ruled with an iron grip. No one was allowed to challenge his authority. No one was allowed to run against him, and no one was allowed to question the legitimacy of his rule. Now, you would think that this man, who governed Syria for 3 decades, did provide anything to his own people. But if you look at the situation of Syria under his rule, you will find that he ruled a poor, corrupt, terrified Syria. A poor, corrupt, terrified Syria. Not only that, he committed massacres against his own people. And one clear example in the history of Syria under his regime was the early 80s massacres that he committed in cities like Hama, where more than 40,000 people, mostly civilian, were massacred by his forces. Now there was an internal power struggle between his regime and the Muslim Brotherhood, but the victims of that power conflict wasn't the Brotherhood. It was the Syrian people. And unfortunately, the majority of the Syrian people, which are the Sunni Arabs. So 40,000 were killed. At least 15 to 20,000 are still missing until today. No one knows their abouts until today. More than 100,000 were forced to flee their homeland, their country, who never returned to Syria. He used fighter jets, tanks, heavy artillery, and mass massacres against his own people. At the time, he used what is called the defense brigades, Saraya Difa, against his people. Today, his son is using what we know, or what came to be known in the media as the Shabiha. The Shabiha means the thugs. So today are the thugs. Yesterday were the thugs, but under 2 different names. The defense brigades, and today the Shabiha. And since that time, since that year, since 1982, until March 2011, no one in Syria dared to challenge the reign of his regime's terror. No one dared to challenge the Assad regime, whether under the father or under the son, from 1980, 82, until the father passed away in 2000, then the son who came to succeed him in June 2000, until March 2011, no one challenged that brutal regime because of what's capable of doing to its own people. Now, I wanted to pass forward to June 2000, June 10th, 2000. On that day, Hafez al-Assad passed away. And although he had a vice president, Abd al-Halim Khaddam, a Sunni Arab, who had no real authority, the Syrian parliament met in an emergency session on the same day that Hafez al-Assad, the father, passed away. They met on in an emergency session where they amended, within a matter of few minutes, amended an article in the Constitution that stipulates that the age of the president, or who runs for a president, or a candidate for a presidency in Syria, should be 40 years old. They amended it and they lowered the age to 34. Why? A perfect fit for the son, Bashar al-Assad, who was at the time 34. So in a matter of few minutes, the constitution was amended just to allow Bashar al-Assad to become the president. Just to allow him to become the president. Bashar al-Assad was never meant to be the president of Syria because he had an older brother. An older brother older brother with the name of Basil al-Assad. Basil al-Assad died in 1994 in a car accident. He was being prepared to be to succeed his father. Remember, we're talking about a republic. We're not talking about a monarchy. We're talking about a republic. The son was being prepared to become the heir. He passed away, he died. So then another son was brought to become the president. The constitution was changed for him. The vice president was kicked out of the country because he did not accept it. And he was lucky actually to leave peacefully or to leave in safety, because otherwise they would have maybe executed him. And this president, Bashar al-Assad, when the constitution was amended to allow him to become the president, he did not run for elections. Again, there was a so-called referendum. A referendum that instated him as a president until 2007. And in 2007, he ran for elections where no one ran against him, and he won again the presidency. He won again the president. June 2011. June 10th, 2011. The same day that the father, Hafez al-Assad, passed away. So it is on the same day. Now, Bashar became the president. Now, given his background, because he was brought from the UK to become the heir, or to be prepared to become to succeed his father, given his background as an ophthalmologist who trained and lived in the UK, many Syrian people felt optimistic that this man might ease the iron fist or the iron grip that his father ruled with. So he's a doctor, lived in the UK, trained in the UK, worked in the UK. So you would think that this man at least understands the concept of democracy, the will of people. Or at least he will respect such values. And yes, indeed, Bashar al-Assad did ease up the situation in Syria in his first year, in what was known as the Spring of Damascus, Rabi' Dimashq, in 2000. People were allowed to speak out. People were allowed to organize. People were allowed to engage in a public discourse that weren't allowed before. So suddenly now you have a relative a new environment in Syria. But that was a short-lived period. Because in less than 1 year, Bashar al-Assad went back and rolled back all of these freedoms, relative freedoms that he allowed to his own people, rolled them back and went again to the iron grip of his father's rule. Now, what was the pretext? What was the pretext that Bashar al-Assad used to roll back the relative freedoms that he allowed to his people? It is the same pretext that his father used to suppress the Syrian people, and that is the war with Israel, the state of war with Israel. Now, I want you to know that since 1973 until today, the Syrian regime did not engage in a one single war with Israel. In one single war with Israel since 1973, the Syrian regime did not fight a war. But yet the Syrian people are living under martial laws since 1963 because of the state, quote unquote, of war with Israel. Bashar al-Assad in 2000 or in 2001 used the same pretext that we are in a state of war with Israel and that we have to solidify our internal front and to make sure that we speak in one voice and not to allow any voices, any trends within Syria to weaken this so-called axis of resistance in the region. So again, the people were suppressed in the name of war that does not even exist, because the Golan Heights under the Israeli occupation and the Syrian army did not even fire a bullet, across the borders in the Golan Heights from 1973 till the start of this revolution, where you started to see some bullets being exchanged, not necessarily coming from the army, or maybe to pressure Israel, to pressure the United States to bring calm to Syria and accept the regime as is in Syria. So under this pretext, now the Syrian went through again another decade of suppression under the son Bashar al-Assad. Now remember that I said that since 1973 until today, the Syrian regime did not fight a one single war with Israel. Yet the defense budget is over 30% of the total budget of Syria. Now you might think that this is nothing compared to our budget here in the United States, but you have to compare both budgets. And let me tell you why. Now, if you look at Syria, I will cite some international reports about the status of the Syrian economy. In 2005, 41.5% of the Syrian people, who are over 22 million, lived under the poverty line. This was back in 2005. 41.5% lived under the poverty line. Do you know how they measure their poverty line? It's not a $500 a month, not a $1,000 a month. It is $2 per day per family. 41.5% lived under the poverty line with less than $2 a day per family. And also in 2005, about 32% of students only 32% of students were enrolled in high school. Unemployment was 12%, with 75% of which are under 25 years old. On the transparency indicator, Syria ranked number 127 worldwide. A huge, huge corruption in Syria. A huge corruption. So add that to the lack of freedoms, add that to the lack of liberties, add that to repression and oppression, add that to discrimination that is being imposed by a minority on the rest of the country, who are over 90%. And I'm not only talking about the Sunni Arabs, I'm talking about the Kurds, I'm talking about Christians, I'm talking about Druze, all who lived in subjugation under this regime that ruled in the name of a sect. Add all of that together, combine them together, and look at the situation and tell me why the Syrian people will not revolt. 40 years of oppression, 4 years of poverty, 4 years of no future and no prospects, and then they come and say that it is a foreign conspiracy. Well, it would have been a foreign conspiracy had the Syrian people did not revolt, because there is no reason for them to live under such a regime. Now, how did the revolution start? We all know that it started in March 2011. What preceded that? What is the so-called Arab Spring? In Tunisia, in December 2010, people revolted against the regime in Tunisia. To be honest with you, I was visiting the UK at the time, and I did not think that the Tunisian people will be able to topple their regime, because I will tell you, I come from that part of the world. We never believed or made to believe that a regime can be toppled. We never were allowed to even think of it. So such regimes, such presidents, such kings will outlast everybody else. And you can look at some of our kings in that part of the world who are over 90 years old, who can't even read in Arabic, can't even structure a one meaningful sentence in Arabic, and they rule, and you have to praise their wisdom. You have to praise their wisdom. And in a recent example, I don't want to mention the country, when our president met with an extremely old leader in the Arab world, if you read the Arab media, they will tell you that they engaged in a discussion. But if you know Arabic, you know that this man cannot even, again, construct a one sentence in Arabic, let alone to engage in a discussion with the US president. So no one ever thought that the president of Tunisia, Zayn al-Abidin Ben Ali, will be brought down. It was a shock for everybody. And when that happened, that people's spirit was lifted up. People felt that if it can happen in Tunisia, then we can borrow the same example and bring other regimes in other Arab countries. So it traveled from Tunisia to Egypt in January. And in February, the Mubarak regime was toppled. And remember that Mubarak wanted to follow on the footsteps of Hafez al-Assad, of making sure that his son will succeed him in a republic again. But that didn't happen. Then it went back to Libya. From Libya, it went to Yemen. From Yemen, there were demonstrations in Jordan, in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, and in other countries across the Arab world. No one ever thought that this will be a possibility, let alone in Syria, where you have a brutal regime that has a monopoly over, and the sect rules in the name of a sect, that has a monopoly over the security apparatuses, that has a monopoly over the military, that has ruled by deterrence and terrified its own people. No one thought that this will come to Syria. Bashar al-Assad actually was very confident that this would never come to Syria. And his justification was that we're not a Camp David regime, quote unquote. And do you know what the reference here is? When he was asked, are you worried that a revolution might come to Syria? He said, no, it will never happen, because we rule in the name of the people and we represent their aspirations. We're not a Camp David regime. Camp David, this is in reference to the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. Because, again, the Syrian regime presents itself as a major pillar in the so-called axis of resistance in the region. It thought that the Syrian people are happy with it because it declares Israel as its enemy. It did not pay attention, or they wanted to neglect the fact that the people did not revolt only because of the humiliating defeats that the Arabs suffered at the hands of the State of Israel. The Arab people revolted because they want to live in dignity. The Arab people revolted because they want to live in peace. The Arab people revolted because they want to see a future. When you look at this, the population of the Arab population, you have over 80% of that population who are under 28 years old. Over 80% of them. So what future do they have? They see the corruption, they see the brutality, and they actually experience the brutality of the regime. They see no future, and at the same time, with the development of the social media or with the media itself, when people see a president, a black president being elected in the United States, a young president being elected in the United States, when people see politicians come and live in developed countries and in the West, when people see the life that the American people are living, because I can tell you, when my perception about America was through Hollywood, through the movies. That's how we thought of America. This is Hollywood. That's all what we knew about America. Now they're exposed to this 24/7. They see this days in and days out. And they want the same life. They want to enjoy the same life. That's why you see the Arab youngsters who are willing to die in the sea trying to migrate to Europe. So they wanted the same life. But still, for Bashar al-Assad and his regime, they thought that because Syria declares that Israel its enemy, it can suppress its people in turn. But the Syrian people said, we're not going to accept it. So how did the revolution started? Few children in a city called Dar'a in southern Syria went and wrote slogans on walls against the regime. It wasn't calculated. It wasn't arranged by a political force. Just few children, because that became the mantra in the Arab world at the time. يسقط النظام. We want the regime to fall. And other mantras that the regime, الشعب يريد إسقاط النظام. The people want the regime to go away. So they went out and they wrote those slogans. So what did the Syrian regime do? They arrested these children, they tortured them, and from there it sparked the revolution and the demonstration in Syria. Now, when the demonstrations started in Syria, they started peaceful demonstrations with small numbers. Their main call was for a reform in Syria. No one talked about toppling the regime until from March 2011 until July 2011. No one mentioned bringing down the regime in Syria. They just wanted reforms in Syria. That's all what they wanted. But because with the brutal response of the regime that killed thousands of the Syrian people who were peacefully demonstrating, who did not carry a gun, the Syrian regime or the Syrian opposition organized with those who defected from the army and started the Free Syrian Army in July 2011. And the first clashes, military clashes between the Syrian Free Army and between the Syrian army was in late September 2011. So from March 2011 until early October 2000, late September 2011, early October 2011, it was peaceful. But what did the Syrian regime? Killed many, many thousands of the Syrian people. Arrested tens of thousands of them. There were a massive scale of rapes against Syrian women. Massive scale of rapes to break the will of the Syrian people. Houses were destroyed. Now, if you look at the situation, look what this regime did to Syria. Over 3 million are refugees. Over 3 million are refugees outside their country. Over 6 million displaced internally. Over 3.5 million houses destroyed. 70% of the infrastructure, the country's infrastructure, is destroyed. You need about $250 billion to rebuild Syria. Syria is not a rich country. Syria does not have oil to export. Syria is not Iraq. Syria is not Libya. Syria barely is making it. So you can imagine the scale of destruction that took place in Syria, just for this regime to stay in power. And what is more ironic, that this man, Bashar al-Assad, is running for election by the end of this year again. He's running for re-election by the end of this year because he still believes that the Syrian people want him to rule. This man still believes that the Syrian people want him to rule. You know, to be honest with you, yes, in his illusionary world, yes, they want him to rule. Because it is the same as they wanted his father to rule them for 30 years without running in one single election. It is the same thing that applied to him in 2000 when he was instated as a president without the will of people, without asking a single Syrian person. And it is the same thing that happened in 2007 when he was, quote unquote, re-elected without even running for the presidency. So for him, it's been working for 40 years. Why not for another 10 and 20, maybe another 40 years? And he's preparing his son, Hafiz, who's named after his father, to become the president, to succeed him. So when you look at the situation of Syria today, some might say, or actually I will leave this to the question and answers, but I wanted to speak, is it worth it or not, but I will leave it to later on. I just want to end with one thing. Some might say, why the Syrian situation was exceptional in the Arab world? Why the revolution was able to bring down the Mubarak regime, was able to bring down the Tunisian regime, was able to regenerate the regime from within itself in Yemen. I'm not talking about the setbacks afterward. I'm talking about at the time, between 2011 and 2013. Why the Syrian regime, the Syrian situation was an exception in the context of the Arab revolutions. I will give you a few reasons. One, the Syrian regime is not tied to the Western powers. It's not an extension of the Western powers in that part of the world. It is the United States that pressured Mubarak to resign. It is the United States and the West that pressured Ali Abdullah Saleh from Yemen to resign. It is the United States and the Western powers that pressured eventually Zain al-Abidin bin Ali to resign in Tunisia, because they know that they can regenerate the regime from within itself, because they have extensions within those regimes, because the military in those countries are attached to the United States and to the West. So they make sure they're confident that they can keep the same regimes even if they have to change faces. But in Syria, you can't do that, because Syria somewhat is independent from these countries, but it is under the influence of other countries like Russia, China, and Iran. So those countries who can pressure the Syrian regime, it's not the United States. Another reason is that the Syrian regime has committed allies like Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, the Shiite sect, and the Iraq of Maliki, because the Maliki government in Iraq is supporting the Syrian regime. Another reason is the Western hesitation to support the revolution. And you can just look at our president here, who says that we cannot change the situation on the ground, though this is not acceptable here in the United States by many politicians. We know that Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, we know that David Petraeus, when he was the head of the CIA, and the defense minister, Panetta, presented a plan to President Obama to overthrow the regime, but he rejected it. And now all what he's speaking about is to change the quote-unquote calculus in the ground to force the two parties to come to the negotiation table. So you have, on one hand, the allies of the Syrian regime are standing firm behind their ally, while you have the so-called friends of Syria are fragmented and not standing behind the Syrian opposition. And take another example. Our government here is still opposed to provide the anti-craft missiles or launchers to the opposition. And that what changed the calculus on the ground in Syria, because the opposition was advancing. Now the regime is using its fighter jets, and it changed the dynamics in Syria. They need these missiles, but our government here says, our administration says, we cannot allow you to have them because these weapons could fall into extremist hands. Now, again, is that the right policy? I don't, now this is another subject. I don't think so. But eventually, this is what's happening there. And I will give you another reason, because Israel is benefiting from it. According to a senior Israeli official who was interviewed by the New York Times, he said it is in the continuation of the conflict in Syria is in our best interest, because it's drawn both the Sunni and the Shi'is to fight an internal war where they have a new enemy within their own religion, within their own sect, rather than fighting us or demanding us to withdraw from the 1967 occupied Palestine. And one last reason, and I will finish here. In Syria today, you have a strange combination where the opponents and the proponents, or the goals of the opponents and the proponents of the regime, met and differed. They met in trying to suffocate the spirit of change in the Middle East, because they don't want these revolutions to continue, especially the Gulf states, especially Saudi Arabia and UAE. They wanted to suffocate, to break the wind of the so-called Arab Spring. These winds were so strong, so rapid, they were going from one place to another until it hit the wall in Syria. So they invested there to make sure that Syria becomes the graveyard for these winds of change in the Middle East. It gave them a space to breathe and to rethink and to rearrange their cards and to make sure that the winds don't arrive to their shores. So that's what happened. That's one part of the equation. Another part where they differed is the Gulf states want to get rid of the Bashar regime because it's an ally of Iran. They want to get rid of him, but they don't want the revolution to be victorious. The Iranian regime want also to suffocate the winds of change in the Arab world because they don't want an Arab access to materialize that will challenge their dominance or their projected dominance or influence in the Middle East. But at the same time, they want to keep the regime. So that's why where we ended with a standstill in Syria. Neither the regime can predetermine the outcome, nor the opposition can predetermine the outcome, because they all agreed, the opponents and proponents of the regime and the opposition, to suffocate and to stifle the change, the spirit of change in the Middle East, but they differed on whether to keep Bashar al-Assad and his regime or to change it. That's what happened in Syria. And because of what happened in Syria, yes, the winds of change in the Middle East are fading. That's why we ended up with a coup in Egypt. That's why in Jordan, and I live in Jordan, I'm Palestinian refugee who lives in Jordan. Every time I go to Jordan, you will hear people saying, we shouldn't demand change, because change will bring us another Syria. Change will bring us another Syria. Destruction. It tells you what kind of brutal regimes we have who are capable of destroying their own countries and own people just to stay in power. And B, it tells you how bad the situation in Syria is and how bad it affected the entire so-called Arab Spring. Because I don't believe that the Arab Spring ever materialized in the Arab world. It is still in the making. Just to dare to speak against these regimes is a major accomplishment. It is not as if you're criticizing President Obama in this country. You are sacrificing your life when you speak about one of these leaders in that part of the world. You are you're risking your life, you're risking the safety of your family just by speaking against these regimes. So I think this is a major accomplishment, and we're yet to see the final episode in that part of the world, because I think eventually the Arab Spring will blossom, it will come to happen, and the Arab people one day will achieve their freedoms. Thank you.
Welcome all. Thank you, Dr. Osama. Before I start, excuse me. Before I start, I would like Dr. Osama to take 1 or 2 minutes to translate what I'm going to say now. من أقصى الأمور أن تكون واجبات إنسان ما أكثر من أوقاته وحجم التزاماته فوق طاقاته، ثم يأتيه هذا وذاك بطلب صغير فقط. أتمنى أن يدرك البعض هذا الطلب الصغير في ناظريك قد يكون القشة التي تقسم ظهر المشغول. إن لم يكن طلبك جوهريا فرجاء لا تثقل كاهل المشغول أو تفهم عندما لا يلبي طلبك غير الضروري، واللبيب بالإشارة يفهمه.
Well, this is, you took this from my Facebook.
Yes.
And the problem, if I know how to translate it, I would have put it in English. Actually, I was sending an implicit message to some people who keep asking me to do things for them, to serve them with different issues that they come to me with, or they ask me for more work to do. And I said, if you have a lot of time, you have nothing to do, don't go to a person who's overwhelmed, who has no time to do anything, who has more assignments, more tasks to do, but does not have the time to do them. So don't go and add to his load. And I said, this could be what you see as a minor request from that person who's overwhelmed. For him could be the final straw that could break his back. And I wasn't hinting to this. It wasn't about this. But no, I work about, 5 maybe jobs. So I have about 5 jobs. And none of them is a full-time job. So when you have about 5 jobs, you cannot master any. And that's my problem. I have to submit a book, the final draft of my book, which was my PhD dissertation. I had to submit it by the beginning of this month. I did not touch it yet. And I have a newspaper in Arabic, and I write for a think tank in Qatar, and I write for a new Arabic newspaper, and I travel every single week about 2-3 days a week. So when people ask me for anything, even if my wife will ask me to take the trash out, I take it as another assignment, another load that is being put on my shoulders. So that was the reference there.